Hello everybody, this is Introduction to Management and my name is Ludmila Neagu. I sure hope you are going to enjoy this class. Now let's start the part 1 of our lecture for this class. The part 1 deals with organizations and managers. As I'm sure if not all of you, most of you are familiar with different types of organizations and perhaps some of you are even managers. Now let's talk about organizations first of all. As you all know, organizations need managers. An organization is a deliberate arrangement of people put together to accomplish some specific purpose. Organizations share mainly 3 common characteristics. The first one is each organization has a distinct purpose, typically expressed in terms of a goal or a set of goals. Number 2, each is composed of people. And number 3, each develops some deliberate structure so its members can do their work. Now, organizations are changing because the world around them has changed and it's continuing to change. These societal, economic, global, and technological changes have created an environment in which successful organizations must embrace new ways of getting their work done. Now, managers of today may not be what you expect. They may be 18 or they may be 80 years old in our society. They might run large corporations as well as startup companies. A Gallup organization study based on interviews with 2 million workers at 700 companies found that the single most important variable in employee productivity and loyalty was the quality of the relationship between employees and their direct supervisors. I'm sure that for some of you that is no surprise there. Now, how do we define a manager? A manager is an organizational member who works with and through other people by coordinating their work activities in order to accomplish organizational goals. However, keep in mind that managers may have other duties as well, not related to integrating the work of others. Managers can be classified by their level in the organization, particularly for traditionally structured organizations, those shaped as a pyramid. Now let's see. First, we have first-line managers who are the lowest level of management. They're often called supervisors. Number 2, we have middle managers, including all levels of management between the first-line level and the top level of the organization. And number 3, we have top managers, including managers at or near the top of the organization, who are responsible for making organization-wide decisions and establishing the plans and goals that affect the entire organization. Now, management refers to the process of coordinating and integrating work activities so that they are completed efficiently and effectively with and through other people. What is efficiency? Efficiency is getting the most output from the least amount of inputs, the goal of which is efficient use of resources. Now, what is effectiveness? Effectiveness is completing activities so that organizational goals are attained, often described as doing the right things. No two managers are alike, again, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the same way as not two people are alike. However, management writers and researchers have developed 3 specific organization schemes to describe what managers do. Number 1, functions. Number 2, roles. And number 3, skills. Now, a gentleman by the name of Henri Fayol, a French industrialist from the early part of the 20th century, proposed that managers perform 5 management functions: planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. And if you look carefully in your notes, you will find a detailed description of all of those management functions. The continued popularity of the functional approach is a tribute to its clarity and simplicity. Some have argued that the approach is no longer appropriate or relevant. Now, in the late 1960s, another gentleman by the name of Henri Mitzberg conducted a study of managers at work. This is what he did. He concluded that managers performed 10 different but highly interrelated roles. Manager roles refer to specific categories of managerial behavior, such as interpersonal roles included figurehead, leadership, and liaison activities. Informational roles included monitoring, disseminating, and spokesperson activities, and decisional roles included those of entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, and negotiator. Managers also need certain skills to perform the varied duties and activities associated with being a manager. Mr. Robert L. Katz found through his research that managers need 3 essential skills. Number 1, technical skills, which are skills that include knowledge of and proficiency in a certain specialized field. Number 2, human skills include the ability to work well with people, both individually and in a group. And number 3, conceptual skills include the ability to think and to conceptualize about abstract and complex situations, to see the organization as a whole, and to understand the relationships between the various subunits, and to visualize how the organization fits into its broader environment. Now let's talk a little about management in the past and today and how it has developed. Organized endeavors directed by people responsible for planning, organizing, leading, and controlling activities have existed for thousands and thousands of years. The practice of management has always reflected the times and social conditions. Now, let's talk about a few examples from history that illustrate how management has been practiced for thousands of years. For example, the Egyptian pyramids and the Great Wall of China, which are 2 examples I'm sure each and every one of you is familiar with. So again, the Egyptian pyramids and the Great Wall of China are tangible evidence that projects of tremendous scope and magnitude that employed tens of thousands of people were undertaken well before modern times. How was it possible for these projects to be completed, you ask? The answer is simple: management. Other examples of early management practices can be seen at the Arsenal of Venice. For instance, warships were floated along the canals, and at each stop, materials were added to the boats. In addition, the Venetians used warehouse and inventory systems to keep track of materials, human resource management functions to manage the labor force, and they also use accounting systems. Now, of course, they didn't call them these particular names. However, they have been using the same ideas, the same concepts, as you can see, for thousands of years. However, 2 pre-20th century events were particularly significant to the study of management. Adam Smith, author of the classical economics doctrine, The Wealth of Nations, argued brilliantly about the economic advantages that division of labor would bring the organizations and society. Now, by divisions of labor, he meant the breakdown of jobs into narrow, repetitive tasks. The second important influence on management was the Industrial Revolution. The introduction of machine powers combined with division of labor made large, efficient factories possible. The development of management theories has been characterized by different beliefs about who managers do and how they should do it. The 6 major approaches to management include scientific, general administrative, quantitative, organizational behavior, systems, and contingency. And during the next few minutes, we shall talk a little bit about the 6 major approaches to management. Scientific management is defined as the use of the scientific method to define the one best way for a job to be done. Important contributions in this area were made by Frederick W. Taylor, also known as the father of scientific management. Taylor's work at the Midvale and Bethlehem Steel Companies motivated his interest in improving efficiency. Now, Frank and Lilial Gilbreth were inspired by Taylor's work, went on to study and develop their own methods of scientific management. Frank Gilbreth is probably the best known for his experiments in reducing the number of motions in bricklaying. Another group of writers focused on the entire organization. They are accredited with developing more general theories of what managers do and what constitutes good management practice. The 2 most prominent theorists behind the general administrative approach were Henri Fayol and Max Weber. Now, Fayol wrote during the same time period as Frederick Taylor. His intention was aimed at the activities of all managers. He described the practice of management as distinct from accounting, finance, production, distribution, and other typical business functions. He stated 14 principles of management, fundamental or universal truth. Those 14 principles of management can be taught in schools, which we're doing right now, and they can also be applied in all organizational situations. So if you are a manager yourself, or if you're going to be a manager in the future, maybe you can apply those 14 principles of management of Mr. Fayol. Now let's see. His principles include division of work, authority, discipline, unity of command, unity of direction, subordination of individual interest to the general interest, remuneration, centralization, scalar chain, order, equity, stability of tenure of personnel, initiative, and esprit de corps. And again, in your notes, you shall find more details about those 14 principles of management of Mr. Fayol. Now let's talk about another gentleman named Max Weber, who was a German sociologist who wrote in the early part of the 20th century. He developed a theory of authority structures and described organizational activity based on authority relations. Max Weber described the ideal form of organization, the bureaucracy, defined as a form of organization marked by division of labor, a clearly defined hierarchy, detailed rules and regulations, and impersonal relationships. Excuse me. Max Weber's theory became the model structural design for many of today's large organizations. Now let's talk about what is called the quantitative approach. The quantitative approach to management involves the use of quantitative techniques to improve decision making. This approach also has been called operations research or management science. It includes applications of statistics, optimizations models, information models, and computer simulations. The field of study concerned with the actions or behaviors of people at work is called organizational behavior. Much of what currently makes up the field of human resource management, as well as contemporary views on motivation, leadership, trust, teamwork, and conflict management, have come out of organizational behavior research. An important concept in management is called the Hawthorne studies. The Hawthorne studies were without question the most important contribution to the developing of organizational behavior field. Western electric engineers initially designed the studies, which started in 1924, as a scientific management experiment. They wanted to examine the effects of various illumination levels of worker productivity. The researchers concluded that social norms of group standards were the key determinants of individual worker behavior. Now we're going to talk about something else for a minute called a system. In management, a system is a set of interrelated and interdependent parts arranged in a manner that produces a unified whole. Closed systems are not influenced by and do not interact with their environment. Open systems are just the opposite. And one more concept before we move on. It's called a learning organization. A learning organization is one that has developed the capacity to continuously learn, adapt, and change. Knowledge management involves cultivating a learning culture where organizational members systematically gather knowledge and share it with others to achieve better performance. Quality management is a philosophy of management that is driven by continual improvement and responding to customers' needs and expectations. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about what's called in management foundations of behavior. Behavior is defined as the actions of people. Organizational behavior is the study of the actions of people at work. The study of organizational behavior focuses on two major areas: individual behavior and group behavior. Now, the goals of organizational behavior are to explain, predict, and influence behavior. What employee behaviors are now a question for you. What employee behaviors are we specifically concerned about explaining, predicting, and influencing? It's okay if you don't know the answer because we're going to talk about it in the next few minutes. As far as that is concerned, 5 important ones have been identified: employee productivity, absenteeism, turnover, organizational citizenship, and job satisfaction. And again, if you are a manager or if you ever had a job, I'm sure you are familiar at least with some of this behaviors that an employee or even managers have in a workplace. Now, what are attitudes? Attitudes are defined as evaluative statements, either favorable or unfavorable, concerning objects, people, or events. Managers are particularly interested in job-related attitudes that their employees have. Job-related attitudes include the following: job satisfaction, representing a person's general attitude towards his or her job; job involvement, the degree to which an employee identifies with his or her job, actively participates in it, and considers his or her job performance important to his or her self-worth. Organizational commitment is an employee's orientation towards the organization in terms of his or her loyalty to, identification with, and involvement in the organization. Now, does the consistency principle means that we can predict an individual's behavior if we know his or her attitude on a subject? The answer is no. The reason for that is called cognitive dissonance theory, which states that any incompatibility between two or more attitudes or between behaviors and attitude. That's what the theory of cognitive dissonance deals with. Now we're going to talk about another concept, personality, and we're going to define it. What is personality? Personality is defined as a combination of psychological traits that describes a person and how they react and interact with others. There are hundreds of personality traits. Two models for classifying personality traits are widely used. The first one is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or also known as MBTI. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator is a commonly used personality test. It measures 4 dimensions. First, social interaction, you're either an extrovert or an introvert. Preference for gathering data, sensing or intuitive. Preference for decision making, feeling or thinking. And style of making decisions, perceptive or judgmental. Combining these preferences provides descriptions of 16 different personality types. The other model is called Big Five model, which is a 5-factor model of personality that includes extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness to experience. Now, in addition to the Big Five model, personality researchers have identified 5 other personality traits that have proved most powerful in explaining individual behavior in organizations. Those 5 other personality traits are: number 1, locus of control, defined as the degree to which people believe they are the masters of their own fate. It can be either external or internal. Number 2, Machiavellianism. Machiavellianism is a measure of the degree to which people are pragmatic, maintain emotional distance, and believe that ends justify means. And I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the character Machiavelli. The name of this personality trait comes from his name, of course. And let's move on to number 3, self-esteem. Self-esteem is an individual's degree of like or dislike for himself or herself. Number 4, self-monitoring is a personality trait that measures an individual's ability to adjust his or her behavior to external situational factors. And number 5 of other personality traits proven powerful in explaining individuals' behavior in organizations is risk-taking. Risk-taking refers to an individual's willingness to take risks, of course. One area of emotions research that's offered new insight into personality is called emotional intelligence, or EI. Emotional intelligence is an assortment of non-cognitive skills, capabilities, and competences that influence a person's ability to succeed in coping with environmental demands and pressures. Emotional intelligence is composed of 5 dimensions: self-awareness, self-management, self-motivation, empathy, and social skills. Emotional intelligence has been shown to be positively related to job performance at all organizational levels. Now, another concept in management is, and especially organizational behavior, is perception. What is perception? Perception is defined as the process of organizing and interpreting sensory impressions in order to give meaning to the environment. A theory called attribution theory is a theory used to develop explanations of how we judge people differently depending on the meaning we attribute to a given behavior. The determination of the cause of the behavior depends on 3 factors. Number 1, distinctiveness. This particular factor refers to whether an individual displays a behavior in many situations or whether it is particular to one situation. Number 2 factor is consensus. Consensus refers to whether or not everyone who is faced with a similar situation responds in the same way with the same behavior. And factor number 3, consistency. Consistency refers to the congruency in a person's actions. There are a number of shortcuts we use in judging others. Those shortcuts are assumed similarity, which is the belief that others are like us. Stereotyping refers to judging a person on the basis of one's perception of a group to which he or she belongs. And number 3 is called the halo effect and refers to a general impression of an individual based on a single characteristic. Now let's talk a little bit of a different concept of management called learning. Learning is defined as any relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience, which we all get, of course, in time. Operant conditioning, again, operant conditioning argues that behavior is a function of its consequences. Operant behavior describes voluntary or learned behavior in contrast to reflexive or unlearned behavior. Now, a different concept called social learning theory says that people can learn through observation and direct experience. 4 processes have been found to determine the influence that a model would have on an individual. Process number 1 is called attention process, which means that people learn from a model only when they recognize and pay attention to its critical features. Process number 2, called retention process, which means that a model's influence will depend on how well the individual remembers the model's action. Process number 3 is called motor reproduction process and describes how an individual can perform the modeled activities. And process number 4, reinforcement process, which means that individuals will be motivated to exhibit model behavior if positive rewards are provided. Now, how do we shape behavior? Shaping behavior is systematically reinforcing each suggestive step that moves an individual closer to a desired response. It can be a useful managerial tool as well. Remember, shaping behavior. Behavior can be shaped in 4 ways. Number 1, positive reinforcement, which works at every single level of the organization. Positive reinforcement is reinforcing a desired behavior by providing something pleasant after that behavior. Number 2, negative reinforcement is reinforcement of desired behavior with the termination or withdrawal of something unpleasant. Punishment. Punishment penalizes undesirable behavior. And finally, extinction. Extinction involves eliminating any reinforcement that is maintaining a behavior. Now, this is the end of part 1 of section 1 of our Introduction to Management course. Stay tuned, and section number 2 of our class, Introduction to Management, will follow.